So it's August. Hey, baby. Yeah, Prince has come to say hello. See how he can get a little bit aggressive. He wasn't really like that before, and I just put it down to trauma. Look, you see, he's attacking my shoes. I don't know. All right, baby, all right. And I've just given him food. He's not hungry. I don't know. It could also be that they're doing something to him. They killed the other hens that I had. They killed them one by one. That's another story I have to tell, but it's very upsetting. I just hope that they're not hurting my chickens. But that's what happens to TIs and what happens to TI's pets. Anyway, that's not what this is about. This is the second in the series of videos where I'm talking about the lies and the framing and the setups that were done. And for some reason, this particular incident keeps coming back to me, that it's a very important one that I have to... All right, baby, all right. Is an important one that I have to talk about. I do... it's possible he's picking up my stress. That's another possibility. I know that happens with dogs for sure. Anyway, sorry, getting back to the subject. So look, this is, I think, a key incident. It was when I was at British Airways and when I had no clue what was going on at all. And the thing is that this incident has come back to me in bits and pieces. First I didn't even know it had happened until I started getting flashbacks. And then more recently, when I was in detention, this memory came back of an actual setup that was part of this. So, and I knew nothing about this, all right? But I think I've talked a bit about it, but I don't think I've mentioned this setup that I've remembered, because I remembered it in detention, and I don't think I've spoken about this particular incident since. Sorry, I'm trying to figure it out in my mind. But look, I don't even know where to start to tell this, because clearly there was things going on behind my back. As I've said many times, let me just check this is actually running. Yeah. Many times they make stories up, okay? But what I've realized now, after all these years and after going through so much, and watching them, how they work, experiencing it, they tell a lie about the victim, and then they set about proving that it's true, okay? And not with real proof. I mean, they just do setups to make it look like it is true, okay? So I became aware, I think this I have spoken about, I became aware that many of the crew were asking me, this is, by the way, I was at British Airways, I was a flight attendant, I got forced out of my job. This is for people who have never watched my videos before. I got forced out of my job, I got mobbed, I got accused of all kinds of things, but nobody actually told me to my face. And these were all setups and framing, and they used mind control, and it's all very, very traumatic, okay? So I became aware that some of the crew they kept asking me the same question over and over again, and it was about, one of the first stories that you hear when you are crew, when you become crew for the first time, is about, oh, did you hear about, the story about the flight attendant who put eye drops in the passenger's meal because the passenger was rude to her or him, either way. And of course, I'd heard this story many times, and it's a myth as far as I knew, and I couldn't really get my head around, you know, how could eye drops be poisonous? I mean, you know. Anyway, because you know, you're supposed to put it in your eyes, and when you put something in your eyes, you absorb it, don't you? And how could it be poisonous? Of course, I didn't know then what I know now, that so many of our medications are actually poisonous. I didn't look. I was a sheep, and I was also under heavy mind control. Okay, so on a particular flight, and this one I have talked about, there was a guy with red hair, and I think he was sitting in either 17A or 17B. It was an aircraft that I seldom flew. It possibly the 757, or it was a particular configuration of the I want to say 787. I'm not sure, but what I want to say about this aircraft, it was one that was unusual in some way. The configuration was different to all the other aircraft. Okay, and I don't know why that's relevant, but it's a fact that I keep remembering. And this guy was in a club seat, and it was either 17A or B. Okay, and that fact just always stays with me. He had red hair. I think he was trying to kind of, he was emulating Derren Brown, who is a guy who does NLP and hypnosis and that kind of thing. You can look him up. He actually does some very interesting experiments that I have spoken about, I think, before. But this isn't about him. This is about this guy who was kind of emulating him. And this guy was mumbling, and he was deliberately mumbling. And, you know, on an aircraft, the noise is quite loud, you know. It's loud on an aircraft. And I couldn't hear what he was saying. And you see, the perps, the gang stalkers, they really study their victims. And, you know, being polite is important to me. And embarrassment is something that hurts me more than if you were to punch me in the face, okay? And so they know these things about the victim. They study the victim in order to hurt them the most, all right? They're just sick like that, okay? In fact, I've said this before, I believe what they are doing is a reenactment of the 1984 torture, which was basically to force the victim to face their worst fears. Now, this is telling me, I think that it's going to run out. One sec. It may cut off. This guy was mumbling, and I couldn't hear him, and he kept asking the same question over and over and again. Finally,